Well, the men's walk in Durban to highlight the scourge of gender-based violence will get underway soon. Government dignitaries are expected to march through the city to raise awareness ahead of this, and we're joined by Karinda Jagmohan. Karinda, earlier you took us through the statistics around gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa. Help us through some of the topical cases that we've seen come to the fore on the same issue.
Absolutely. This week we had a number of gender-based violence cases emerge. In fact, you remember there were 2 women that were killed allegedly by a 23-year-old Durban policeman whose matter is currently at the courts. That's in west of Durban. Then in Richmond, in the KZN Midlands, a woman was murdered. She was pregnant, and then her body was set alight. Last month there was the double murder. 2 women related to each other were found dead. Their bodies had been stripped of clothing, and they were found in a parking lot in Isipingo, south of Durban. Last week we had the case of a man who killed his ex-girlfriend and then turned the gun on himself, both 25 years old. And what has stood out in that case is that the woman had gotten a protection order against her ex-boyfriend who'd been stalking her, could not accept that the relationship was over. And this protection order stated that his firearm should be removed. But this never happened, and the murder-suicide occurred last week, Sunday. Then in KwaMakuta, there was a murder of an elderly woman allegedly by her husband. And in that case, she was stabbed at the back of her neck, and a medical practitioner told the court that her death would have been slow and painful. And in that case as well, a week prior to the murder, she had gotten a protection order against her husband, who had threatened to pour boiling water on her. She was murdered a week afterwards. And I can go on with a number of gender-based violence cases of women who have been murdered at the hands of their partners or people that they know, including as well children having been the victims of gender-based violence and femicide. It's a harrowing number of cases we have seen in KwaZulu-Natal. And like I mentioned earlier, over the past 4 years, these statistics have been increasing. There's at least been a 13% increase in murders of women and children over the past 4 years. In the first quarter of this year, at least 800 women were killed across the country. The president has described this as the nation being at war with women. Today's march through the city of Durban is expected to raise awareness right now. Of course, people who look up to the AmaZulu king, who respect what he has to say, will then hear the messages that he has to give, as well as government dignitaries. But of course, this is ultimately an awareness campaign. There is more that needs to be done on the ground when it comes to bettering our police services as well as our courts. Currently in KwaZulu-Natal, we do not have a DNA forensic lab. Any DNA evidence that needs to have a report filed about this has to be sent to national offices in Pretoria, and that has delayed a number of criminal cases at the court. So at this point, many women or the families of slain women say that they feel failed by the police system or by the justice system, having not found any justice for their loved ones as yet.
Well, Karinda, we know that the newly coronated monarchy is, of course, going to be leading this walk. He has spoken on the issue before. What do we expect to hear from King Misuzulu on this issue? He is, of course, wanting to hit the ground running with a Zulu monarchy that tackles contemporary societal issues head-on. What can we expect to hear from him today?
Indeed, this is his first event, public event, since his the last leg of his public coronation that happened just last month. And so it is a critical event right now. And the first issue he's tackling is gender-based violence. He'll be speaking towards the end of the rally here, so towards the afternoon. And of course, then messages, especially given to men, about the scourge of gender-based violence. And that's who he's looking to target essentially at this point. Before his father's passing, King Zwelithini Kabeko Zulu, at the last Mkosi Wamhlanga or Reed dance that had taken place, hosted by the late King. It was a smaller group of women there because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but then the late King had advised young women to even take up self-defense classes because he was worried about the increasing pandemic of gender-based violence, and he actually advised young women to ensure that they equip themselves with the defense strategies they need. So perhaps King Misuzulu will give similar advice to young women, but of course warnings to men as well, as we see that in many of these cases of gender-based violence, it is intimate partner violence that occurs, whether it is physical abuse, sexual abuse, or emotional abuse. And many of those cases go unreported, especially in rural areas or township areas where there isn't proper access to police stations. So perhaps he may also give a message to the KZN government about increasing capacity at police stations and making police officers aware that this is what they need to be targeting now.
Karinda, we will of course continue to monitor that story out in Durban. Meanwhile, Professor